wish to continue refuah shalema to Rabbi Myers. And obviously I can't even come close to giving the Parsha Shiur that he gives, but we'll try to learn a little bit about the Parsha, a little bit about some of the themes of the Parsha, and give some ideas into the major messages that come from the Parsha. So of course this week is Parshas Beshalach, the great Parsha that has all the excitement of Vaz Yashir, Kriyas Yamsuf. Of course, the Parsha we come back to later in the year when it comes to Pesach. But let's just briefly discuss the beginning of the Parsha. So it's important to note that if you look through any Parsha, the question always is, what is the connection? How does one story, one event, one episode flow into the next one? Right? If you look at the Art Scroll Stone Chumash on the left side, where it has the English summary, what is one story? How does it lead into the next story? So Parsha Beshalach seems very, very disjointed. It's all over the place. It's the Jews traveling. There's Man. There's Kriyas Yamsuf. There's Amalek. In theory, though, this Parsha is actually one long story, and that's the story about training the Jewish people to get the Torah. You'll notice that last week's Parsha in Bo is when the Jews left Mitzrayim. In Yisro, in next week's Parsha is when they received the Torah. But there is a Parsha in between. There is a bridge between Bo and between Yisro. And that bridge is Beshalach. And that bridge is about what did the Jews need to learn? What do they have to figure out? What do they have to understand about themselves, their relationship with Hashem, the role of mitzvos, of commandments, of what does it mean to not be a slave? All of that is in Parshat Beshalach. So you'll see that even though in Beshalach there are many moments that you would imagine Hashem would be upset when there's complaining and there's frustration, but in this Parsha it's very normal. It's very par for the course as the Jews are learning not to be slaves. The Jews are learning what does it mean to be free, how to worship Hashem, and everything that incorporates. So right in the beginning, you'll notice that the Parsha shares with us that they went roundabout. Beshalach paro esam v'lo nachem elokim derech eretz pelishtim. Hashem doesn't lead them straight through. Ki karovu, even though that was closer and quicker, the man who doesn't want to ask for directions. So they could have gone straight. Ki amar elokim peyinachem ha'am berosam melchama v'shavu mitzrayma. Right? That maybe the Jews will want to go back. They'll want to go back. So what does this mean? So it could be the Ibn Ezra explains that Hashem had to make sure that this, they just left Mitzrayim. He had to see that this generation, where was their breaking point? Will they be able, if they got to Israel right away, to actually fight for the land? The Malbim says that the Jews needed that time not to go directly straight Eretz Pelishtim, but they had to create the courage. They're going to have to fight wars and, engage in battles. They needed time. They needed time to sort of build up that emotion, that courage, that bravery that's going to entail. But the Meshech Chachma explains, Meshech Chachma, the Meir Simcha of Devinsk, he explains very simply, if the Jewish people had left Mitzrayim and gone directly to Israel, it would have been disastrous. Why would it have been disastrous? He explains, in their heart, he writes, they lived in Egypt for 210 years. They lived in a world of idols. They lived in a world of promiscuity. Had they gone, he says, directly to Israel, what was happening in Israel at this time? Had they left Mitzrayim, taken a bus ride, and gotten to Israel 3 days later, what would have been there? It was full of the 7 nations, full of Avodah Zarah. There's no way, says the Meshech Chachma, that they would have been able to hold themselves back. They would have been swallowed up by that culture. That's what they're used to. Yes, even though the Jewish people maintained their name and their language and their dress, and they weren't on the 50th level of Tumah, they were in a pretty bad place. They have to build themselves up so that when they get to Eretz Yisrael, they are ready to be the Am Segula, to worship Hashem, to set up the land, to do what their destiny is supposed to be. However, if they are not able, if morally, if in their kishkas, they can't shake off the Avodah Zarah, and then they come to a land that is full of Avodah Zarah, well, That's not fair. And then they're going to be swallowed up, and they're not going to last. So the Meshech Chochmah explains that that's why it has to be derech eretz, not derech eretz pelishtim ki karovu. They can't go straight. They really have to go in a roundabout way to give them the time, to build up that culture. There's a fascinating idea actually offered by Rabbi Yoel ben Nun. Rabbi Yoel ben Nun is a current great teacher of Tanakh in Israel. And he explains that had this, we know that when the Jews left Mitzrayim, it was done with the permission of Paro. Right now, Hashem makes it that Paro chases them and then gets, swept up in the Yam, drowned in the Yam Suf. But it's with Paro's permission. The route that they could have gone, that very straight route, Derech Eretz Pelishtim, was, under Egyptian rule. So what would have happened, he says? At every stop along the way, at every border, they would have gotten there and they would have said, yes, Paro, he let us go. Very nice guy, very, very kind of him. So here's our stamp of approval. Here is our exit papers. Please let us pass through. And it all would have been done. And then they would have sent the letter back. Paro, thank you very much. You let us go. And had they left in that manner, maybe Paro would not have pursued them. So in order that Paro pursues them, they go in a different direction, not through Paro's lands, not through Paro's borders, not through Paro's officers, their own way in which Paro has this desire to come and chase them. Okay, we'll continue with the following. The pasuk tells us, the next pasuk actually, Vayazev Elokim Esam Derech HaMidbar Yam Suf, they go around about Vachamushim. Alu b'nei Yisrael mi'eretz Mitzrayim. Vachamushim. Now, what does Vachamushim mean? What does it mean? So Rashi, in his first interpretation, says Mizuyanin, they left. Egypt was heavily armed, so it means that they left with weapons. They left with weapons. They needed something. But then Rashi shares with us another medrash, a very disturbing medrash. The medrash says that Chamishim Echad Mi Chamisha. That what happened? We know that the medrash tells us that 4/5 of the Jews died during the Makkah of Choshech. During the Makkah of darkness, 4/5 of the Jews died, 80%. Right? It's a comment of the Targum Yonasan ben Uziah. So it means Vachamushim, 1/5. Imagine that. What a crazy number. 1/5 of the Jews left. And then there's another interpretation. Another interpretation is Chamusha means good ma'asim tovim, good deeds. So just to recap, it could mean 1/5 of the Jews left. Another interpretation is they left with Vachamushim, with 5 children. Or it could mean they left with good deeds. So what is this? What do you make sense of this? I'll share an amazing idea. Rabbi Yosef of Salat, he wrote a beautiful sefer in the 1800s called the Be'er Yosef. In the Be'er Yosef, he suggests an utterly fascinating observation. He says, hold on a second. If 80% of the parents died in Egypt, who took care of the children? If 80% of parents died in Mitzrayim, who took care of their children? Didn't die, the parents died. So what's the answer? It's the famous 80-20 rule. 20% of the people took care of the 80% of the children. Right? It's the 80-20 divide. In philanthropy, 20% of the people give 80% of the money. In volunteer work, 20% of the people do 80% of the work. Right? And when it comes to complainers, 20% of people take up 80% of your time. So the Be'er Yosef says, when the Jewish people began their journey in the desert, they were armed with this compassion. And now you understand the different interpretations. What does it mean? They left with 5 children, 5 sets, their own set, and 4 others. What does it mean? Masim tovim, love, devotion, compassion for the orphaned children. It's that's the idea of a chamushim. Could be armed, could be, good deeds, but it's possible that it means that they left taking care of every single Jew left with the family. Okay. Now, of course, the major theme of this parsha is Kriyas Yam Suf. So the Yam Suf, of course, splits. The Jewish people then erupt into Shiur. So let's understand for a second. First, let's build up what's happening here. First, we know that Paro has a change of heart. Vayugad lemelech Mitzrayim ki barach ha'am. Paro, they fled. Vayafech levav Paro v'avadav, his heart changes. And he says, Ay, mazos asinu, what did we do? Ki shalachni Yisrael me'avdinu, I can't believe it. We got to go get them. We got to go get them. So number one is that Paro has a change of heart. Paro decides that, as Rav Hirsch says, he sends them away with the idea that they're not returning. Once, though, they turn back towards Egypt, Paro, in his great, ego, Paro thinks, they're turning back. I beat God. I won. So let's go get him. Right? Or it could be the Ramban suggests that Paro thought there was this 3-day plan. Hey, Moshe, you kept asking for 3 days. 3 days are over. What are you still doing? So therefore, he goes to get them. So then they prepare for battle. They go out. They get their horses ready. Paro, unlike other kings, is leading from the front, and he goes to chase the Jewish people. And the Jewish people look up, and oh my gosh, the pasuk tells us, Paro he kriv, and they lift up their eyes. They open their eyes and they see them. Oh my gosh, here are the Egyptians. Vayiru'u ma'od. Vayitza'aku b'nei Yisrael al Hashem. They are fearful, they're frightened, they're terrified, and they cry out to Hashem. Says the Ramban, there are different groups here. There are different groups. So some groups are Vayiru'u ma'od, and some groups are davening to Hashem. But I think it's also fascinating that you could suggest that these are the same groups. Meaning, when they saw the Egyptians coming, they got the Tehillim out and they davened, and they had Tehillim rallies, and they did it in the shul, and they did the Tehillim. They closed their Tehillim books and they looked up. The Egyptians are still coming. Now it's Vayiru'u ma'od. Maybe they thought, I davened, shouldn't it come true? Shouldn't what I've davened for have happened? And when it doesn't happen, they don't know it was a crisis of faith. And of course, we know that's not why we daven. We don't daven, we don't know an automatic answer. So now they get very fearful. Then, of course, we have Az Yashir. So the question, just to share a few ideas we'll spend the rest of our time with this focus. Why in the world is now Az Yashir? Now they sing. You mean to tell me that whether it was the makos, whether it was frogs coming out of the sea, whether it was blood, water turning into blood, makas bechoros, carbon pesach, you mean to tell me that in none of those moments the Jews spoke, the Jews sang, and all of a sudden after Kriyas Yam Suf, it's Shira. Shira is it's deep. Shira represents a song that is beneath any kind of just thank you Hashem. Right? Henry Giles was a famous English preacher in the mid-1800s. He said that a song will outlive all the sermons in the memory. When you want to express something, you sing it. So why are they only singing it now? So the very simple answer is they're singing it now because they feel safe. For the last year or so, even though the Egyptians were getting beat up and Egypt was getting destroyed and they were getting hurt, they were still in Egypt. The Egyptian taskmasters were still their taskmasters. So we don't really feel safe. And then finally, only when they're really wiped out, okay, then the Jewish people can say, we feel safe. In fact, when we talk about the Arba Lashonos of Geula, Hotzesi, Tzalti, Goalti, and Lakachti, we know that the Torah Tamima tells us it is a progression. It's Arba Geulos. So Hotzesi was, all right, no more Egypt, like we're not slaves. But Itzalti is the Egyptians were wiped out. I'm never going to worry about them again. Maybe that's why the Jews sing Shira now. Yeah, they might have thanked Hashem, but only now do they truly feel safe. That could be number one. It's also possible that something at Kriyas Yam Suf transforms them. There is a dialogue between Moshe and between Hashem. As they're on the banks of the river, the waves are roaring in front of them, and Egypt is approaching behind them. Moshe lifts up, and he davens. And Hashem says, Matitzak Elai, what are you davening to me? Daber al b'nei Yisrael v'isau. Tell the Jews, Genuk Shain, let's go, move on. what's happening here? Wasn't prayer the right thing? I mean, think about it. If you were watching, if I had a student who was sitting there not sure what to do, and they decided to take her to Tehillim and daven to Hashem, that's a nachas, an email to the parents. I mean, you probably have to email after the Yam Suf split. It was very difficult. You don't want to get your phone in the water. So what does it mean that Moshe's davening? And Hashem says, Moshe, why are you davening? So explains the Mashal Chachma. Until now, the Jews had followed Moshe, like sheep following a shepherd. And even though they might have doubted Moshe's ability, he was their shepherd. They were the flock, and they were going to prepare to follow him into the sea. So God turns to Moshe and says, Moshe, they've demonstrated their willingness to follow. They must now demonstrate their ability to take the lead. Matitzak elai. Davening is not what's holding you up. V'yisa'u. You have to do something. Let them go in. Let them take the plunge. Then, literally and figuratively, then you follow them. God says to Moshe, I need the Jews to exhibit some initiative. Right? Like we talked about Carbon Pesach. 70 out of it, you got to go in. And that's what Shira is. Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik explains that Shira is when not only did I have a victory, but I was a participant in the victory. Shira is sung when I've done something of epic proportions. It's a culmination of hard work and toil and difficulties. So after the Yam Suf, we didn't just say, thank you, Hashem. That Shira was a deep-seated look at what we did. 7 days removed from leaving Mitzrayim. 11 days removed from the Carbon Pesach. And look at this faith that we had. We jumped in the Yam Suf. We went in and we followed V'yisa'u. That's deserving of Shira. And that's what the whole story of Kriyas Yam Suf. It's Nachshon ben Aminadav, who says, I'm going to jump in. I'm going to get involved. We feel Nachshon's like nervousness, right? He doesn't know what's going to happen. He risks everything. He jumps in and the water gets higher and higher and higher. Then it splits. And how interesting is it that Nachshon's reward is the Fichach Zacha Yehuda La'asos Memshala B'Yisrael. We learned from here that Yehuda gets Malchus, because that's what it means to be a leader. So that's number two. Number one is they felt safe, and they only felt safe when they knew the Egyptians were wiped out. And number two is they took initiative. And on this point is the next idea. Not just that we took initiative, but that we are in charge of our own destiny. There is a fascinating opinion of the Tosas and Erchin. The Tosas tells us, even gives a illustration, that the Jews traveled in the Yam Suf in a semi-circular fashion. That's right. That means that when they finished, they ended up on the same side of the Yam Suf that they started. Right? So what's the great miracle? What's the great miracle? After hundreds of years of slavery, they begin to panic. So God, oh my gosh, are there not enough graves? Mimli and Kvar Mitzrayim, there not enough graves in the desert. In Mitzrayim, you got to bring us out here to die. What were they so afraid of? They were afraid, even though Paro had 600 chariots. The Jews had 600,000 armed men. If you do the math, not including any other female help, there was 1,000 armed Jewish men per chariot. So why were they afraid? Because the same idea, until this point, they couldn't break the shackles of the slave mentality. They might have left Mitzrayim, but in their minds, in their psyche, in their being, they were slaves. So even though their numerical advantage was by the thousands, they couldn't even entertain it. So Hashem, everything changed at the Yam Suf. Why? Because in the Yam Suf they said, Rashi says, they're talking about their parents. The Jews now are reminded that who they are is important. The eternal message of Kriyas Yam Suf is that from that day forward, the Jews realized they defined their own identity. The goal of crossing the Yam Suf was not to get to the other side. The chicken didn't cross the road to get to the other side. They crossed the Yam Suf to retain their identity, to learn who they are, to exist, and that nobody else could determine it for them. It's an amazing story about Yaakov Galinsky. Yaakov Galinsky was a Rav in Bnei Brak. So he talks about his incarceration in Siberia. So he explains that him and everybody else had back-breaking labor every day. And days merge into nights, you didn't know anything. Rav Galinsky relates that there was one distinguished man, even though he's exhausted, what he would do is one night, every night, but the rabbi then realized this, the rabbi couldn't sleep one night. So he wakes, he turns over and he sees this elderly man. What was he doing? He got out of bed, he changed out of his prisoner garb, put on a military uniform, all the medals, looked in the mirror, saluted, muttered something, and then went back into his prisoner clothes and went to bed. The next morning, Rav Galinsky says, don't worry, I'm not going to tell on you, but what's going on? What are you doing? So he explained that, in Siberia, it's easy to lose faith of who I am. So every night I put my uniform on, I put the medals on, and I remind myself of who I really am. Okay, and I'll give you just one more because I think it's one of the most important ideas that I love to share about Kriyas Yamsuf. We know that in the Yamsuf, the Jews did not all the Egyptians did not all sink the same way. Right? They didn't sink the same way. The pasuk tells us some sank like even, stone, some sank like kash, like straw, and some sank saluko aferes, like lead. And Rashi, quoting the Medrash, the Mechilta explains, it depended on what kind of Egyptian you were. If you were the really, really bad Russia, that you were like straw, back and forth, whipped around by the stormy seas, right? That's the really, really bad ones. If you were like the middle bad ones, then you went down like stone. And the good Egyptian, so to speak, sank like lead right to the bottom. Why do we need that? Why is that important? Because the Jews realized after Kriyas Yamsuf, after the Yamsuf, they get together, they're looking, and they see from afar that the different Egyptians and how they treated the Jews is how they're getting punished at the Yamsuf. And the Jews realized something that they hadn't realized until now. And that is that Hashem was looking out for them even during their exile. Simcha Zissel Broi was the great mashkiach in the Hebron Yeshiva. And he writes in his Sefer, the Sam Derech, that this is exactly what happened at the Yamsuf. The Jews realized that Hashem didn't just, so to speak, show up after 210 years and say, Moshe, let's go. He didn't just show up afterwards and say, Moshe Rabbeinu, get the Jews, we got to go to Israel. That Hashem, as difficult as it was to watch, Hashem was there, Imo Anochi B'tzara, with his people. We call it Shchinta B'Galiusia. Hashem is Shechina, even in exile. And Hashem was keeping score, so to speak, of who was punishing the Egyptians, who was treating them poorly, and is now taking his revenge. And that's why we say, Shira Chadasha Shibchu Alayam. It's a new song. They could not have sung this before. Number one, we said, because they feel safer. Number two, they took initiative. Number three, they're arbiters of their own destiny. But really, it's the ability to say, no, what? I couldn't have sang this. I didn't realize this. I didn't realize that even in exile, Hashem is there. It's painful. Hashem is crying with us in exile, but he's not ignoring us in exile. He might be hiding his face, Hester Panim, but he is not there's a hidden God and a hiding God. Where we might have to find him, but he is there with us in exile. And that really leads us to the final idea of Kriyas Yamsuf. And that is, how did the Jews know that it wouldn't come crashing down? How did they know? Yeah, they go in and it splits and it goes straight up and it's beautiful. How did they know that it wouldn't come crashing down on the Jewish people? And their answer is, they didn't know. We started this Parsha Shiur by talking about the fact that Beshalach is a training grounds. Beshalach is the Jews coming together. Beshalach is about, getting the Jews ready for the Torah. One of those lessons is, I have no idea, Rabbi Ramon explains that the Yamsuf was, we live in a world of uncertainty. we have to be reminded that the road to redemption has ups and downs, and that it's a process. And we don't always know how that process is going to play out, but it's all part of the process. And that's why this idea is so important about Kriyas Yamsuf. Number one, it teaches us about initiative. It teaches us about we are in charge. It teaches us that we live in a world of uncertainty, and that even if we can't see or understand where God is in exile, Hashem is always there with us, watching over us and looking out for us. I wish everybody a wonderful